Hey scholars, I'm going to show you how to start your burlap weaving. You are going to need some of your supplies. Your burlap frame, yarn, needles, and scissors. The first thing you're going to do is take a wingspan of yarn. Remember, to take your wingspan of yarn, hold the end of the yarn in one hand. Unravel, 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 all the way to a wingspan. Then you're going to drop this end and cut off the other end. Here's our wingspan of yarn. Now we want to make sure that this ball of yarn doesn't turn into a tangled mess. So take the tail end and wrap it tightly around the yarn. Make sure you know where that tail is for when you need to get more yarn. Next, take one of your needles. Do this gently because you don't want to mess them up. You don't want them to break. You're going to take one of the needles, just like this. You are going to put the tail end of the yarn through the eye of the needle. That's the loop. So put the yarn through the eye of the needle. Then you're going to pull the tail to meet the other tail. They should match up together. You do not need to tie this. You don't need to do anything. Once you have your needle looking like this, so through the eye, all the way to the tail end, it's time to get your burlap frame. With your burlap frame, you're going to take your needle and we're going to start sewing the edges. The edges are going to make this burlap frame nice and strong so the burlap doesn't detach. Go ahead and look at your frame front and back. Which side looks like the back? Which side looks like the front? The back is the side where we can see the edges. The front is nice and clean. These little burlap strings hanging off the side, we don't have to worry about those. I'm going to take my needle from the front. I am going to really close to the edge. I'm going to put my needle through the burlap all the way to the edge. So I have my yarn right here. I'm going to flip over onto the back and I'm going to hold this yarn tight. I do not need to tie it. I don't need to do anything. All I'm going to do is take the other length of my yarn and I'm going to cross it over. I'm going to cross it over where that part of the yarn was. Then I'm going to put my needle through the other side and pull it tightly. And I see my string right here. Again, I want to make sure that the longer part of my yarn is crossing over that short tail end. That short tail end is about the length of the first part of my finger. So where my first knuckle is. So it's about the length of your finger where it meets the first knuckle. So cross that over and put your needle through this third hole. Pull it nice and tight, making sure that loop is snug by the other ones. The reason why we don't have to tie anything is because when I'm sewing, if I keep putting my new loops of yarn on top of where my tail end is, it will hold it tight. This is also going to be how you start a new piece when you run out of the length of this yarn. So there's my tail end. And I'm gonna pull that nice and tight. And soon I'll have enough length on this sewing part that I'm gonna cover up that tail end. So make sure you want those stitches to be close together next to the where the burlap meets the popsicle stick, and you also want them to be close together on the popsicle stick. So close together where the burlap meets the popsicle stick and close together side by side on the popsicle stick. You can see I'm almost done covering the tail end of that first piece of yarn. So I'm going to pull this through. Make sure that your needle doesn't get caught in one of the loops. And there we go. This is going to be the last time I need to go over that loop. I'll go over my tail end. I'm going to scoot those aside so they're nice and snug together. And there we go. Now I don't have to worry about covering up the tail. I'm just going to work on making all of my loops nice and close together. Next, I'll show you how to end one of the pieces of yarn and begin a new one. Hang tight. All right, once you are getting close to the end of your yarn, mine is a little bit longer than a finger length, Once it's about a finger length, I'm gonna go make one more stitch. I'm gonna show you guys how we're gonna end this piece and add another piece. So I finished up my stitch. It's about one finger length, a little bit less, but that's okay. I'm going to cut the yarn. Make sure you're not cutting the needle. Cut just the yarn. And we're gonna leave it. We're gonna leave it right here. So I've got my burlap frame. I've got my little yarn tail hanging on. And I need more yarn. So same thing, we want a wingspan. Hold the yarn in one hand, unravel it with the other. Needs a little help unraveling, you help it out. So wingspan, I got a little bit too much. Need to wrap it back up. Wingspan, too much. Still too much. I need to hold it in one hand. There we go. That's my wingspan. That is how long I want my yarn to be. So I'm gonna drop it, cut the tail end, and thread the needle. So take the yarn, put it through the eye of the needle. Take that all the way and make sure you've got your needle on one end and the two pieces of yarn match up side by side on the other. Let's go back to our burlap frame. I've got my tail end over here and my new yarn right here. Same deal where we're gonna tuck these tails and start our new loop. So I don't need to tie anything. I can just leave it like this. I'm gonna put my needle through one of those burlap holes and pull it all the way to the end. Now, since we have 4 ends we need to take care of here, I'm gonna make sure you are keeping them straight. Make sure you're keeping those straight. So I've got 1, 2 right here and 1, 2 back here. We wanna take all 4 of these ends and put them in the back. Now, with my finger, I'm just gonna use my thumb to hold these 4 pieces. Once we get our first loop around, we won't need our thumb as much. So I'm gonna take my needle and put it in the burlap hole and pull it around, making sure to cross over the back. Notice how my left thumb right here is staying on top of those 4 pieces of yarn. I'm gonna take my needle, and here's where, if you have a grown-up, they need to help you out. If you're getting frustrated, can be a lot of fine motor skills here. I'm holding it, Notice how those 4 tail ends are starting to get in line. Gonna put my needle through the next piece of burlap, pull it through. Nice and tight. I don't think I mentioned this, but we want to make sure when we're pulling our yarn, we're pulling it nice and tight. All right, those 4 tail ends are starting to get looped in, starting to be underneath where we are sewing. Keep on keeping on with putting the needle through the burlap and holding those. It looks like I don't need to hold those too much longer, but I'm going to keep my thumb there for good measure. You can too. We're also going to see how to switch from one side to the other side in just a minute. See how those tail ends are getting tucked in? I don't think I need to hold them anymore. I'm just going to stick the needle in the burlap. Make sure those pieces of yarn are side by side. And it looks like I'm almost ready to finish this edge and start on the perpendicular edge. Perpendicular means it's at a right angle like this. Okay, so I'm flipping over. Those tail ends are nice and tucked in like they should be. See how we tuck those tail ends in? We didn't need to tie any knots. They are going to be safe. They're not going to go anywhere. My yarn won't unravel. Now I'm going to try and do one more loop on this edge before I switch over. Okay, here we go. Now, how do I go from this side to that side? Well, my yarn is right here, and instead of going around this way, see how those tail ends are tucked? Just leave them alone. They are good to go right there. Instead of looping back around like this, I'm now going to loop my yarn, my needle and yarn, this way. So I'm going to loop right here, and I'm going to continue my sewing, and we're going to continue this all the way around our frame. And you know what? I'll probably need a few more wingspans of yarn to complete the frame, and that's okay. Take your time. Notice you can kind of move these if you don't think they're close enough together. I'm going to finish this one on camera, and later I will come back and show you how we're going to wrap all the way around. Thanks, guys.